You're tuned in to Last Stop Waterfowl Outdoors podcast. Waterfowl hunting and conservation is our passion. We cover everything outdoors, from the blind to the banks. Come along with us as we hunt and fish our public land reserves and bayous throughout Sportsman's Paradise. Tune in for interesting interviews and takes from much of the industry's most intriguing outdoor companies, content creators, guides, and historians as we discuss various topics as they pertain to our pursuit of waterfowl and everything outdoors. This is Last Stop Waterfowl Outdoors. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now here's your host, Jacob Robery.
Hey, what is going on, everybody, and welcome back to an all-new episode of Last Stop Waterfowl Outdoors podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Robery, and it is good to be back with you guys as we are now in between that time where we have just wrapped up Christmas and we are ready for 2025, the new year, to be upon us here within a couple of days. So I hope all of you have had a great holiday season so far. I want to wish every one of you a Merry Christmas to you and your families. And hopefully you guys have been out there doing a little bit of hunting if you've had some time off during this holiday break. I know that the conditions have not been perfect. It has not been great here in Louisiana specifically. I could speak for us here in the Bayou State. Weather has not been super great for duck hunting with a warm trend kind of coming into the area over the last week or so. We've had some nasty foggy mornings, a little bit of drizzle. But sometimes, that turns into some good duck hunting. I know a lot of people don't like to get out there and fight that hot weather at this time of year, specifically when you're at the end of December. We would all hope for a little bit of cold weather, but that's not what Mother Nature's granted us. And it's just been a weird year. So, it's, really not surprised with the weather patterns lately. But it does look like we have some promising cold weather going to be moving in over the next week or so as we get into 2025. So with us, we've been really busy with the holiday schedule, guys, and, just a lot going on. Really haven't got to get out there as much as I hoped we could over the last couple of days, but that's going to change here in the next couple of days ahead. So I'm looking forward to getting back in the blind with this little cold front that we have that's going to hit us here in the next couple of days. I'm hoping that that's going to, give us a little bit of momentum as we get ready to round out the end of the season and head into January. And I know you guys are saying the end of the season. I mean, it's hard to believe. We say that every episode, it seems like. But, yeah, here we are. We're heading into January already, guys. So that means we have about 4 weeks left. Some of us a little bit less than that. And, another end to a duck season, which is hard to believe. But that's where we find ourselves right now. So, but anyway, hopefully you guys had a very good Christmas. Like I said, I want to wish all of you and your families a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from us here at Last Stop Waterfowl Outdoors. And although we haven't been in the blind over the last couple of days, we've had some stuff going on. We actually got to bring Jackson's a duck over to the taxidermist yesterday. That was pretty cool. And that all stems back to when we opened up Second Split here in Louisiana a couple of weeks back. Jackson was lucky enough to harvest his first mallard drake ever, and really an exciting moment for us, for me as a father, for him as a young hunter, and that's something that he's had as a goal over the last several seasons. He's really wanted to get him a mallard drake to be able to mount. And a lot of you guys that listen to this, you're not from Louisiana, you're probably saying, "Man, that's no big deal. We kill mallard drakes all the time." Well, I'm here to tell y'all guys that in Louisiana, that is not the case for us anymore nowadays. We've talked about how mallards are not nearly as prevalent as they were at one time here in Louisiana. And for us to get mallards early in the season specifically, that is really, really rare. And also on a season where it is not, a lot of cold weather that has hit us here in the state. So I noticed earlier this year that there were some mallards being harvested during the first split of the season. And I told Jackson, I said, I just have a feeling this year we have some mallards down a little bit earlier than normal. And he told me, he said, "Dad," he said, "I don't think I'm ever going to get me a mallard." He said, "It seems like we just don't see them anymore. We don't seem to get them." He said, "It just ain't in the cards for me." Well, lo and behold, we opened up second split of the season in the East Zone is where we were hunting at. And sure enough, the first hunt of this new split, we went ahead. We had I think right at daylight, we had a wood duck come in. I let him go ahead and shoot the wood duck. And then the next two birds that we saw were a pair of mallards. It was a drake and a hen, and they worked in perfectly for us. He was on the left side of me in the blind. I was holding down the right side of the blind. Birds worked around the front of us. They came in from his side, and then sure enough, he saw that big mallard, that big drake, and went ahead, pulled up on it, shot it. I went ahead, I took the hen. We got both of them out of that situation. And when I tell you guys, this boy was thrilled. He was absolutely ecstatic whenever he saw he had dropped that greenhead. So we were lucky enough to catch it all on film. If you follow us on social media, on our YouTube channel, on our Facebook page, you probably watched the video by now. And just an ecstatic moment for us, man, for him. You know, he was pumped up just like he should be. It happened. It couldn't have happened more perfectly, I tell people. You know, I've had several of y'all reach out to him, congratulate him on that, and also, you know, reach out to me, tell him congratulations. And I thank you guys that took the time to do that. It really meant a lot to him. He really appreciated that, those of you who reached out to him. So just an awesome moment. I'm glad it happened the way it happened and where it happened specifically. It was on a piece of public land, a wildlife management area that we hold, you know, very close to our hearts. It was something that was special. It's something that a piece of property that I grew up hunting with my dad, and we were able, you know, when I was coming up, to be able to have, you know, a good bit of mallards frequent that area. And although we don't have that nowadays, it's just ironic that he got his first greenhead in this specific area. So just something that's very, very special for us as a family. You guys got to share in the experience if you watched it on video as it unfolded. So just a cool experience. But yesterday we got to go and drop it off at the taxidermist, and he was chomping at the bit to get it to the taxidermist, guys. He's been wanting a greenhead, like I mentioned, for several years now. And with Christmas coming around, you know, as a young man, he gets a lot of money from grandparents, all that type of stuff. He knew exactly what he was going to do with that money he got for Christmas. And sure enough, he didn't waste any time. He told me yesterday, he says, "Dad, I want to go over to the taxidermist. I want to bring my duck, and I want to pay in full for it and get it done." So we went ahead, we dropped it off at a local taxidermist yesterday. So now it's just a waiting game, guys. Y'all know how that is. Anybody who's mounted anything, or, you just got to wait. You got to wait on it. And, you know, it's going to be a something that, you know, you'll probably forget about for a little bit. And then all of a sudden you get that call from the taxidermist letting you know that things are ready to go and it's ready to pick up. And it becomes, you know, all worth the reward at that point to be able to see that bird and have that bird, you know, for the lifelong, adventure that you're going to have in your waterfowl hunting career. So just a cool deal. Very excited about it. And it's something that really was special to our family. So if I could tell you the one thing I got for Christmas that was probably the most special to me, it was probably that situation there, guys, that event that we had occur there, and just an awesome deal, man. So very, very happy to have him with me on that hunt. So really, you know, things for us guys, once that second split kicked off, it was really an exciting hunt, that first hunt. Not only did we harvest, you know, a couple of mallards in that hunt, but we also had a nice bag. We had a 2-man limit that we ended up with on that first hunt. And really, that was when the majority of birds seemed to have hit us down here in South Louisiana where we were hunting in the timber, at least for the second split so far. That was the best hunt that we really had, that second split. That morning, we had a 2-man limit. Like I mentioned, we had, you know, gadwall, we had mallards, we had teal, we had wood ducks. We had so many teal that opening morning, man. They hit us, and they hit us hard in the woods where we were hunting at, and it was something to see. I'll tell this story real quick. We actually had a situation that morning where we had wrapped up our 2-man limit, and then Jackson, we were hunting outside of the boat. You know, we had tugged the boat back in the woods. So Jackson looked at me. He says, "Dad, I'm gonna go ahead and go get the boat and bring it to the blind." He says, "If you don't mind, go ahead and pack up the guns." I said, "Okay, no problem." And at this point, we still had noticed that teal. We had a good bit of teal that were flying around, and it was probably about 9 o'clock, 9:30, somewhere in that time frame. Kind of unusual for teal. You know, a lot of times they'll fly real early, and then they kind of disappear for a little bit. Well, in this situation, he goes to get the boat. I'm sitting in the blind. I go ahead. I put the guns in the gun case. And then I had cameras. I was filming with the GoPros and stuff like that. So I went ahead. I started taking those off, putting them in the case. And as I'm doing that, I hear something coming from the right side. And when I look up, guys, if I could tell you what I saw was absolutely just astonishing to see coming through the timber. It was a group of about 80 to 100 teal that came through the treetop into this hole that we were hunting. And they came in all at one time and just sat down in the decoys. And what was crazy is the first wave hit the decoys, and then they had ones right behind them that were literally hovering. They were just kind of hovering, and then they dropped. They just fell like gravity took them and just dropped into the decoys. And here we are. We have all these teal sitting in the decoys, and I'm looking at them. They're 4 feet away from me, some of them. And I'm looking at him, and I turn back to Jackson. And when I turn back to Jackson, these teal jump up, and they go every which way to try to get out of the hole, man. So pretty awesome to see a group that big come into a little timber hole that we were hunting. And it just kind of blew my mind. I was like, man, how can they fit that many birds into that little timber hole? But they did it. And that was something that was pretty special to see. Unfortunately, I didn't have the cameras running because I was putting them up, like I mentioned. And wasn't able to catch those on camera, but I really wish I could have caught that for you guys to see that as well, because it's something that don't happen that often, and it's pretty special to see. So that was pretty cool. If we would have had more guys with us, like I mentioned, it was only me and him that morning. We could have really pounded on him and had a situation that got ugly pretty quick. So, but we were blessed to have a great opening morning hunt and have lots of birds and a wide variety of birds, and then. From that point on, it changed rather quickly, guys. Like I mentioned, a lot of warm weather, stale weather came into play. Just not great mornings. The birds seemed to have left the area, in that specific area that we were hunting, and we weren't able to repeat, that hunt again so far on the second split of the season. But like I said, it's not done. We have, until the end of January, and I think we have some good days ahead of us there. But in this episode, guys, I really, really want to talk about a topic that's something that I see is becoming an issue as the season goes on more and more. It seems like this year we talked about, hunter pressure, so many more hunters, it seems like this year on public grounds, and that's something that we've talked about that has its own issues and that we've seen come into play this year with a lot more people. But in this episode, guys, what I really want to talk about is the growing struggle for public land spots. And I'm going to tell you guys a story that I had a situation that I ran into, unfortunately, as this second split unfolded and opened up, that I'm going to share my experience with you on this episode and in this episode specifically with all of you to tell you the story of what happened. And whether I'm wrong or whether I'm right, and everybody has their own beliefs on what's going on, whether you're wrong, whether you're right in a situation you find yourself in, like I found myself in, it really doesn't matter. I think we could use it all as a learning experience, whether you're on one side of the fence or the other side of the fence. So, when we're talking about a growing struggle for public land spots, not only are we losing ground on public land when it comes to, adequate hunting land spots to be able to hunt. And specifically, I have a lot of experience throughout the season on WMAs, wildlife management areas. So this is where you typically are seeing a lot of issues come into play. But the situation that I had was a little different. It involved not only public land, but it also involves private land as well. And I'm gonna share my experience. I'm gonna get into this and kind of tell you guys, what happened to me and kind of what I've experienced. So going back to that opening weekend of duck season here in the E-Zone, that successful hunt we talked about, that memorable hunt that I had with my son. We do it the right way when it comes to public land. The way we hunt at this specific WMA, I'll just explain it to you guys to give you an idea of what it's like. It might be a little bit different than what you do on public land at, a different WMA that you hunt. But on this specific piece of public land and management area that we hunt, we have a system in place, and it works really, really well for all of us that hunt this particular area. So what we typically do is, well, let me give you a little bit of backstory. Years ago, what we would do on this wildlife management area is we would all go to this area where the launches were. And we're hunting timber. So it's timber holes that we're hunting in the woods. And what we used to do is we'd all stage in this parking area that was in the WMA technically. But, nobody ever had a problem with it. Game wardens, there was no issues with it. They would let everybody stage in the parking lot back there. And the deal was that you couldn't launch a boat until 4 a.m., which is the rule here in Louisiana. You couldn't launch your boat till 4 a.m. And so what would happen is if you got in line, say it was opening weekend, and we had guys that would get there on a Friday afternoon, and the first guy that would get there, he would have a choice of what hole he wanted to hunt in that timber that morning, because it's only a limited amount of holes that are available. And actually through the years, it's really shrunk. So it's gotten even less. But the guy who was there first had first choice of what hole he wanted to hunt. Second guy that was in line got second choice of where he wanted to hunt. Third guy, and so on. So it was really organized. And we always liked the way it was set up there because there was no races to the hole. There was no trying to run guys over with a boat to get past them to beat them to the hole. None of that type of stuff, which is totally different than what it is on other places that some of you may hunt. But in this particular situation, we've always agreed that it was safer to do it that way. It was fair to do it that way. And it gave everybody an idea of, where they were going to be able to hunt and where others were going to be hunting around them. So it made things a lot safer, and it was just a good system. Well, then at one point there came a time where, we had game wardens that showed up one year. It was some new game wardens that came into the area, and nothing against the game wardens. They were just trying to get everybody to follow the rules in this particular situation. But what they did was they came in one evening. I think they could have handled it a little bit differently than they did, but they came in one evening and they pulled up at the launch one year on an opening weekend, and they started writing tickets to all the guys that were back there. Now, what was crazy is that I have always hunted this area and had for years hunted this area. But this particular year that this happened, I had got invited on a hunt to go somewhere with some friends, and I wasn't there that year. But I had some good friends of mine that were there. And some of them were sleeping in their trucks. They were just trying to get some rest like many of us do. When you're on public land, you get there real early. And the game wardens came through. They started writing tickets to people, and they were knocking on windows, waking guys up in their trucks and wrote tickets to them and telling them that they had entered the wildlife management area before 4 a.m., which technically, yes, they did. That you were in the WMA, but it was a big parking lot for these two little boat launches that go into the timber. We had always staged there for years, never had any issues, and it just never had been a problem. That's as simple as I could put it. So anyway, at that point when that happened, that was probably 8 or 9 years ago, maybe 10 years now. And they said, hey, you got to go out to a main highway, which runs parallel to the wildlife management area. And you're going to have to stage up at the corner of the main highway and the road that enters into the WMA to come back to these boat launches. So that has been the deal for several years now. Now, just to give you guys a concept of what it is, where that corner is, that staging area is, to the back boat launch takes you about 10 or so minutes by truck to be able to get to the back boat launch to launch your boat. And then, of course, you have everybody back there. Depending on where you are online, it might take you a little while to launch the boat, get to your hunting spot. So never been a problem. That's the way it's been. But some of these guys will get there if they really want to hunt a particular hole, or they feel that the hunting's good, or it could be a good day to hunt. They'll get there really early, man. My days of getting there at, day before or 12 o'clock at night, that's for the most part that's over. And when we had went opening weekend, we staged up at our staging area that I'm telling you about, and we were surprised because we didn't have a ton of guys back there. We only had, I think, 4 or 5 vehicles or boats back there, so we really didn't have to really get on top of each other that opening weekend for that first day of that hunt that I talked about. So that worked out really, really well. Well, in our situation, me and Jackson had a really good hunt, and he wanted to get back to that hole the next day. He was hoping that we could maybe repeat some of that success we had. And he said, Dad, he says, if we could get there early, says, I'd appreciate it. I'd like to hunt it. It's opening weekend. We had a really good hunt today. let's see if we can maybe get some of that again, to go on. So I said, okay. I said, if that's what you want to do, I said, we'll get there a little bit earlier. Well, I had a buddy that texted me about 12 o'clock, and he said, hey, look, this is 12 a.m. in the morning. He says, hey, I'm already here. I'm in line. He said, we got 2 trucks or 3 trucks ahead of me. So it looked like there was going to be a little bit more, action that day. I guess maybe word had got out somehow that we had, maybe they heard some shooting back there. Maybe guys were just, working that opening morning, some guys, and they wanted to hunt on Sunday. Don't know. But it seemed like there was going to be a little bit more pressure. So what we did is we went ahead, jumped out of bed. We have a camp that's literally from the staging area about 5 minutes at the most, maybe even less than that. So we jumped out. We got dressed. I asked Jackson, I said, you want to go get in line? He says, yeah, let's go get in line. We jump up, we go get in line, and we go ahead and we get there, and we're the 4th boat. Well, what we do typically is we'll get out of our trucks, and we'll all kind of have a conversation with the trucks ahead of us. Or the trucks behind us. Just everybody gets along real well, man. Usually it's a pretty cool deal. It's kind of what I love about public land hunting, to be honest with you. Meeting new people. You have some relationships with guys that we don't really see throughout the year, but then you get to this time of year and then you see these guys at the boat launch every year and you get to kind of get caught up with them. It's just tell stories, tell lies. It's just a good time. So we get there and it looks like, okay, we check with the guys in front of us and none of them seem to be calling dibs on the hole that we hunted the day before where we had that 2-man limit on opening day. So Jackson got really pumped up. He was excited. He was like, man, he said, Dad, I can't believe, he said, we're going to get to hunt it again. I said, well, good. No problem. This will be good. So we, come time 4 o'clock comes and we go ahead and we all start making our way to the back launches. We leave safely. We get to the holes. And this specific hole that we're hunting, it was a hole that I had to make a trail to at the beginning of the season when we scouted it out because it's been overgrown, not a lot of rainfall, didn't have a lot of water back in this area throughout the summer at all, and even at the beginning, first split of duck season. So I had a trail that I ran to the back of the hole, and as I get to the back of the hole, it's about 4:15, 4:20 is the time when I look at my watch. In that time frame, Jackson ran that hole perfectly that morning. He was up on plane, just a real smooth, path to the blind that morning. So we get to the blind, and when we get to the duck hole, we got to go through these buttonwoods, and it opens up to our little hole that we were going to hunt. So when we get through these buttonwoods, all of a sudden a light hits me, and it flashes me, and I'm like, it kind of catches me off guard. I'm like, oh shit. There's somebody sitting in this hole. So my immediate reaction is that, man, somebody had to have left early, ran to the hole and, got there, left, before 4 o'clock and held the hole down. But then again, when we got to the back launch, there's nobody there. We were the first boats there. So we knew kind of, okay, well, that couldn't have been the case. Obviously, nobody, bypassed us on there. So I said, well, let me see what's going on here. So I kind of nose into the hole. Granted, this is about 4:20 in the morning, sometime around there. And nose into the hole, and there's a guy sitting in a boat there, and he's, with 2 other people in the boat, and they're sitting there, and they have a full spread of decoys set up. They have mojos out, pulsators out, whatever. I mean, just complete spread. They've obviously been there, it looks like. So what it is we have a piece of private property that borders up to the WMA. And I figure it's got to be somebody from private land that's in there. So I pull in, I kind of nose in, and I say, hey, I turn off my motor. I say, hey, good morning, how you doing? And the guy says, man, I'm sure you're disappointed to see me sitting in here. And I said, yeah. I said, well, I understand. Yeah, I said, it kind of surprised me, I said, we hunted here yesterday. We got in line. We were able to, get dibs on this hole, supposedly. I said, and, yeah, I am kind of surprised to see you. And I said, man, do you happen to be such and such? And I'm not going to name the guy's name, but I had ran into this situation several years back and met a guy that was coming in off of private land. And he was in the whole same situation when I had, got to the hole. And we ended up that time when we met each other, he was by himself and he said, hey, man, he says, why don't we just hunt together? Because the situation we find ourselves in is like I talked about, guys. We have limited spots to hunt. So when I claimed that hole in line, there's a couple of holes behind me, that other guys in line are going to be able to claim and hunt. And there's really not a lot of leeway to be able to say, oh, you get to that hole, okay, well, I can go find another hole. There's really not, it's not like that in this particular situation. You kind of have to get your hole, claim your hole, and everybody's spread out enough not to be on top of each other. We can work birds, that situation. So in a situation like this, I get to the hole. There's a gentleman in the hole coming in off of private land. And, there's really not a whole lot I could do as far as going back behind me because there's guys in other holes. Now, there is a little timber hole that's about 100. Actually, I can tell you it's 156 yards away from this hole that I was planning on hunting that this guy's sitting in. And I said, well, man, I said, look, I said, he kind of, the guy was kind of laughing, not laughing, I don't want to say, but kind of sarcastic, I guess you could say, when he was saying that he was in there. And I said, look, I said, hey, you know that typically when you are hunting public, you're supposed to come in like everybody else on public through the WMA. And he says, he kind of smirks it off, and he kind of mumbles something under his breath. And I said, look, it's okay. I said, no problem. I said, but I'm going to have to hunt this hole that's not too far down from you. I said, because there's guys behind us. And I said, it's about 156 yards from what I could see on my own X app. And I said, that's about the best I could do, without getting right on top of you or, going back and messing these guys up in that situation. And he says, well, I don't want you hunting that hole really either. I don't feel comfortable with you next to me. And I said, well, look, man, I said, I understand that. I said, but I am an experienced hunter. I said, I'm not going to call birds off of you. I said, we'll make it work. I said, we'll make it work. I said, it's not that close to you, but I said, it is considered closer to what we normally would hunt, with other guys. And he says, well, man, he says, I'm hunting this hole and I really don't want you in that hole and blah, blah, blah. And I said, look, I said, I kind of am in a situation. I said, I have to hunt that hole. I said, it's either that or leave. I said, and, I'm trying to hunt with my son. I said, and that's, I want to be able to take him on a hunt and hunt with him today, So he's like, okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. Not too happy with it. You can tell he's not happy with it. But at the same time, I'm just thinking to myself, okay, I'm tucked back in this little hole. I'm not going to call birds off of him if I see birds working him. I'm just not that type of person usually. I'm not going to do that. So, I said, I'm going to make this work. And hopefully we both end up having a good hunt, So we go about it that day. We don't have any issues, really not a lot of birds that second hunt. And we make it work. They would call, we wouldn't call on if they saw something. They were over us. They didn't really call at any of the birds that we had, none of that type of stuff. So it was good. All that ended up working out really well. Wasn't a repeat of the second day, of the first day. I'm sorry, the success that we had the first day. But, I just started thinking, I was like, man, I said, this is kind of crazy. I said, this is a situation where, we're doing it legally through the WMA. We're doing it the right way, like we're supposed to stage up, and then we have, somebody coming in that has private land over there, and there's no boat launch as far as I'm aware. So I said, these guys have to be leaving their boat in the water and coming in to beat us to these duck holes. And the guy told me that morning when I went in there and talked to him, he says, well, he says, we leave it forward just like you leave it forward. And I didn't say nothing to him when he told me that. But here I am. He's telling me that. He's sitting in his boat anchored down in the hole that I hunted the day before. And he has all his decoys out. He has all his mojos out. He's ready to hunt, basically. There's no way he got to that hole, left at 4 o'clock like we did, and we have to legally do, and was able to enter that WMA, set up all the decoys, all the mojos, and be ready to go. And he left at 4 o'clock because when I get in there, it's about 4:20. I'd say latest 4:25. There's no way that all the amount of decoys he had was set up. So I've been around this sport long enough to not be a fool, and I could recognize little things like that. So what I know happened, and I know this is what it is in my heart, is the day before when we had that opening morning hunt, me and Jackson, and we were shooting and we were having that success. I heard a boat come in from the backside of us that was banging off of trees and, coming through the timber. And then they got to us and they shut off the motor. They probably saw our light in the hole, and they were coming in off of private land. And they probably, kind of ticked off that they didn't get the hole they were trying to get to as well. And, they decided that, hey, when they heard all that shooting, well, tomorrow we're going to make sure we get there because we have a good idea these guys on public land are going to be coming back. So we got to get there and we got to beat them, and we're going to be sitting in that hole ahead of time the more set up. That's probably what happened. Some of you may agree with me on that. Some of you may disagree and say, well, who knows? You really can't say. And that's true. We really can't say that for sure, But he went ahead, he claimed it. And the other key point that I want to bring up is that he told me whenever I pulled in there to kind of see who it was and talk to him for a second, he tells me, he says, you will never beat us to the hole, to this specific hole. He says, we are planning on hunting this every weekend. It's probably not worth you even coming to this hole because we're going to be hunting it every weekend, which kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I'm going to be honest with y'all, because the way I look at that is I'm saying to myself, okay, you have all this private land, which is the same set of woods that we have that butts up to the WMA and that we're hunting. You have potholes in these woods that are yours. Your family owns this. And then here you are trying to say, hey, we're also going to hunt our land, but we're also going to hunt the public land as well, and we're going to stake claim to this. It's no use you even come on a weekend because we're going to be in here. And that kind of rubs me the wrong way. And it did rub me the wrong way. Now, I didn't tell him nothing. I didn't say nothing about it at the time. I just said to myself, okay. But as I got to my other hole, I sat down, kind of settled down, got my decoy set up, and we had that little bit of time in between shooting. I'm thinking about that, and I'm running that back in my head. And I'm saying, man, that really don't sit well with me. And I don't think it would sit well with any other public land hunter that's sitting in line all night to do it right. We have a system in place where everybody knows the system. We have to abide by the rules. We do it by the rules. And then we come in and then you get in and there's somebody coming in from private land into the WMA that's claiming spots and then telling you, hey, it's no use you really even come here on the weekends because we're going to be here and we're going to beat you to the hole every time. Because we have, an access point coming in from our land. So is it right? Maybe legally, some of you would say, yes, it is right. Maybe some would say, no, that's not the rules. That's a gray area. So went ahead, went home that weekend after opening weekend and, just went about our ways, didn't think about it too much more anymore. Well, the following weekend, this is where it gets really interesting, guys, in my situation here. So the following weekend, me and Jackson decided to go back to the camp. We said, hey, we're going to give it a shot. We're going to go back. We're going to try to hunt. I'm sorry. I missed out on a key point. It's actually not the weekend. And the previous weekend when I spoke to the brother, the guy that was in the hole on that second day, I told him, I said, okay, I tell you what, I said, I'm off all this week during the week for the holiday. I said, are you going to be here at all during the week? He says, no. I got to go somewhere. He says, I'm not going to be here during the week. I said, okay, well, I'm going to come hunt during the week, one day at least this week coming up. And I said, that way we shouldn't have any issues when I talk to him. He's like, yeah, that shouldn't be no problem at all. So what we did was we actually didn't wait till the following weekend. Me and Jackson went back on a Thursday. I think it was a Thursday or a Friday is what it was. And we decided that we were, okay, hey, it's during the week. We shouldn't have any issues. We're going to go back to that hole and hunt it. Because he really wanted to have a return trip to that hole and hunt that specific timber hole. So this was a Friday, I believe it was, actually. So we go ahead and we get in line. We only have like 3 trucks there that morning at the staging area. So we go ahead, we get to that spot. We are able to draw that blind. We go ahead and make the run. And sure enough, I'm coming through the buttonwood holes into that opening of the timber hole to get into the hole itself. And nobody's in there, okay? So I pull my boat in there. I pull my boat in, and as I'm pulling in my boat, I see a light coming from the back private property, and they're shining through the woods at us, okay? And I hear them start saying something. They're hollering at us through the woods. So I turn off my motor, and I'm sitting now in the middle of the hole. Obviously, I made it there first. Nobody's in the hole. And I hear somebody hollering, hey, we're hunting that hole. We're hunting that hole. And I said, excuse me? And they say, we're hunting that hole. And I said, well, you're not in the hole. I made it to this hole first. And he says, it's a different voice than the weekend before. And he says, no, we're stashing the boat right here in the woods. And I said, well, hold on a second. I said, I'm in the hole. I said, where's your decoys? And the guy says, I'm coming. So this kid's walking through the woods. And I'm going to call him a kid because he's a younger gentleman. He's probably 20, 21 years old maybe. And to me, he is a kid, But it's a young man that's coming through the woods. And I see him hauling his boat. He's pulling it by hand. And he's coming through and he's trying to hurry up because he sees me in the hole, obviously. And I'm trying to find out what he's talking about. And he comes over and he finally makes it to me. And he's like, hey. He's like, we're hunting this hole. He's like, my family owns this land back here, and we're hunting this hole. We're just trying to stash the boat. And I said, well, man, hold on a second. I said, where's your decoys at? And he says, well, they're in my boat. And I said, where's your guns at? Any of your equipment at? And he says, well, that's all in my boat. I said, well, look, man, I said, obviously you're not having established the hole, and on public land, it's first come, first serve. I said, Where are you coming from? He says, well, I'm coming from the back private property. He says it again. And I said, okay. I said, well, why were you pulling the boat? And he says, well, my motor was giving me trouble and I'm having to walk to the hole through the woods. And I said, well, look, man, I said, in that situation, I said, you haven't established this timber hole. I said, I made it to this hole legally coming through the WMA. I said, I said that therefore I have, access to this hole. Now it's me and Jackson hunting. It's only us two. And I said, do you have somebody with you? And he has a buddy that's with him. And come to find out, a really nice guy. The buddy was a super nice guy. And he's not saying anything. He's still back in the woods. He's still trying to pull the boat toward the timber hole through the woods. And I'd say they're probably 40 to 50, 60 yards out maybe from reaching the hole whenever I first made contact with him. And I said, well, man, you can't claim a hole that you haven't made it to yet just because you're planning on hunting that hole. I said, if somebody's coming in from public, this is a public piece of property. I said, and me and my son made it here. I said, and then you start flashing the light through the woods. I said, that's really not you. I said, you're not in the hole. I said, we made it to the hole in that situation. I said, but look, man, I said, well, when I tell him that, I can tell you this, he gets upset immediately. And he's like, no, my family's been hunting this hole. My family has this property and this. I said, look, man, your family may have this property behind us. I said, but this is WMA, clearly WMA. You know that. Yeah, I know that. But we hunt this hole. I said, okay. I said, do you happen to have family members like a guy by the name of, and I named the name of the gentleman I knew that I had talked to the weekend before. And he says, yeah, that's my brother, my older brother. I said, okay. I said, well, I know your older brother. I've actually hunted a hunt with your older brother before. I said, and we ran into this situation last weekend where we came in and they were set up in this hole. And I said, pretty much I'm sure ahead of time, which would make it illegal. I said, but I'm not going to get into that with you. I said, but we're running into this now. And me and him had a conversation. He told me that he wouldn't be here during the week. And now it's during the week and you're trying to claim this hole and you haven't even made it to the hole. I said, so we have a little issue going on here that we need to discuss like gentlemen, And this kid didn't want to have it, man. He was just, he was an entitled personality, if I could say that to describe it. Just seemed like he had the rights to this hole to hunt, And I was like, at this point, I was to the point whenever I saw him start kind of having that attitude, I was like, okay, I'm not going to back down to this kid because first of all, I've established myself in this hole to hunt. And unfortunately, we're having to have a conversation that's really uncomfortable now, So I said, okay, look, I told myself I'm with my son. I'm not going to get into an argument with this kid. I said, I'm going to try to handle it like a gentleman. So I told him, I said, look, man, I said, is it you and your buddy only? He says, yes, it is. I said, well, let's just hunt together. I said, let's make it work out. We'll hunt together. It's 4 of us. We can make it work, no problem. And he goes on. He's like, well, are you sure? And I said, yeah, I'm sure. And I said, that's fine. We'll make it work, man. It's 4 of us. We've hunted 4 in here before. We shouldn't have any problems, So he's like, okay, that'll work, and this and that. So it's like he kind of goes off to get his boat. Him and his buddy continue to make their way through the timber. I told Jackson, I said, hey, we'll just hunt with the guys, no problem. Maybe we could have a civil conversation to kind of educate each other on how we can work this out in the future, So we end up, getting up, hooking up in the hole, and he says, he comes out, and I can tell he's still aggravated. He says, well, I guess we got to use your decoys. And I said, well, man, it really don't matter to me. I said, if you want to use your decoys, I said, that's perfectly fine. And I guess he was looking at my decoys, and I don't have real high-end decoys. It looked like he had some, flock head decoys, some real high-end stuff. I said, man, I brought all my stuff. I have my boat here. I'm already starting to put it out while you still getting the boat. I said, but if you want to put out some decoys, put out decoys. I said, if you have some stuff, maybe some motion decoys, I said we could add them to the spread, that type of stuff. So anyway, we go ahead, we do that, we set up, and man, I could just tell it's bothering him that we didn't leave. That's the plain and simple way to put it. He wanted us to leave that hole whenever he was, contacting us, yelling at us through the woods. He thought we were just going to give it up and leave, and he was going to be able to hunt it. And I'm like thinking to myself, okay, we're going to make it work the best we can work. Maybe we could have a conversation about future, how we're going to handle all this stuff. And maybe we could get to know each other. And if we get to know each other, then we could have a situation where it's a lot better if we do run into this again with any family member. Now, granted, this young man proceeds to tell me that, he actually lives in Kansas. He hunts Kansas all the time. He plays baseball in Kansas, that he's actually not living here, but he's here for the holidays. So, he's coming in to hunt, that type of stuff. So I'm like, okay, yeah, that's great, and this and that. So anyway, we go ahead, we meet the friend, super nice guy. Like I mentioned, man, he's willing to work. You can tell he wants to get along. This guy don't want any kind of confrontation. We talk a little bit about what he normally hunts. We talk about where he's from, where he grew up playing, high school sports, all that type of stuff. Just like guys do when you meet up with people on public land and you hunt together. Having a good time, getting to know him. Well, the young man that is trying to stay claim to the hole, he's back there and he's kind of staying off to himself. He gets a phone call, and I quiet down when he gets his phone call, and I hear him talking. And what it sounds like to me is that he's talking to his older brother, which is the gentleman that we had met the week before. And I guess he kind of starts, getting him riled up maybe, or telling him, fuck that, that's a fuck, them guys should have left, and, this and that. And I can tell there's something going on conversation-wise because he's trying to keep it quiet, but it's so quiet I can hear him talking, the cell phone conversation, just bits and pieces of it. So as he gets off the phone, his attitude completely changes, in this aspect. It goes from kind of trying to get along to just outright being a dick, being a dick about it. So he starts, well, I don't know why, you telling me that, I should have to enter in through public if I'm going to hunt public, and my family has property right here and I could come in anytime I want, and this and that, enter in from there, and you're not going to beat me if I run there, which is ironic because you did that morning and I beat you to the hole, and here you are bitching and complaining and wanting to take your ball and go home because you didn't make it to the hole before I made it to the hole. So in that situation, you didn't beat me to the hole. So I could ask you to leave, if anything, because technically I made it to the hole first, and I stake claim to it. But you're on public land, you're going to put up with this type of stuff. And unfortunately, this is a situation that we find ourselves in on this hunt. So he gets off the phone. He's just totally different attitude. And he says a couple of things, and I look back and I kind of say, man, look, we're just going to agree to disagree. If you don't like it, I said, man, you're more than welcome to pick up what decoys you got. Go ahead, go hunt on your private property right here. I said, as a matter of fact, let me ask you something. I said, why don't you hunt your property? It butts up to these woods. This is the same woods that we have access to on public side that you have access to. And I know there's duck holes in there because you can see it on aerial imagery. There's potholes just like we're on. And he proceeds to tell me, he's like, man, we don't have ducks that go in there. This is the end of the line where the ducks want to go, blah, 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 which is total horseshit, in my opinion. That's just my opinion, but total horseshit, because it's all the same woods we're hunting, So so I understand. I said, that may be the case for you. I said, but man, you got to understand that we got guys that are in line, doing it legally, doing it right. Some of these guys sleep in their trucks overnight. I said, and I'm here today. I said, but it may be another guy tomorrow or next weekend that's sleeping in his truck because he wants to hunt this hole. I said, and he's doing it legally, and here he comes doing it legally, and here you are sitting in the hole coming in off of private land. I said, do y'all have a boat launch on your land that y'all launch into here? And this is where it kind of gets interesting. He says, no. He says, we don't have a boat launch. We just kind of bank it up on the bank, he says, and we keep it in the water, and then we'll run back into these areas back here. I said, well, where do y'all launch the boats from? And he says, well, my brother launched the boat at the beginning of the season at the launch where y'all launch at. He says, and he brought it and come through WMA onto the private property and then banks it on our property. So I'm like, okay, well, that's kind of interesting because in my mind, I'm looking back at the rules and what I remember, and I'm thinking, okay, well, I don't think that's real legal for you to launch at a public launch in a WMA, come through, never pull the boat back out, and keep it, banked back in there. That's what I'm thinking at the time, and I'm thinking that's kind of where the law states it. The rules, the regulations state it. And when I tell him that, he don't really say nothing at that point because you can tell he don't really know, and he's not sure either. He's thinking, oh shit, I may have opened my mouth there. So, we go ahead and I told him, I said, look, man, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. I said, if you don't want to hunt with us, I said, pick up your decoys, go ahead and move out. You have all your private property right here that you could go in there and hunt. I said, we should be fine. And the buddy's wanting to hunt with us, the friend of his. And he's like, him and my son Jackson, they look at him and they turn around and they say, come on. They said, come on, man, let's just make it work. Let's make it work so that we can have a good hunt and let's move on from this. They're trying to be civil. My son shouldn't have to be a part of that. I'm trying not to raise hell with this kid, and I'm trying to be a more mature person as an adult and a hunter, and I'm saying to myself, okay, if I'm his age, maybe I'd be doing that too. But I can tell you the difference between my generation and what he was displaying for his generation is that if I would have got there and I would have had an adult that I see as obviously quite a bit older than me, and I knew in the back of my mind that he made it to that hole before I made it, there is no way in hell I would have argued with an adult or I would have got into a confrontational situation with an adult or, had those smirky remarks that he was making, and kept on. I would have dropped it. My dad taught me better. My parents taught me better than that when I was coming up. And I've taught hopefully my son better than that, and I just told myself, I said, I wouldn't have handled that way. Obviously, this kid feels like he's entitled, probably never been told no in his life, not used to being told no. And, what he wants is what he wants, and he thinks he's entitled to get it, So, but I tell myself that, and I say, okay, I'm going to drop it. And so I just decided at that point when he's kind of, revving things back up after he gets off this phone call that I'm going to kind of shut down. I'm just going to talk to my son. I'll talk to his buddy because he seems to want to get along real well and have a good hunt, this and that. Well, what this kid proceeds to do is we're getting closer to shooting light, legal shooting light. And he's sitting on a stool leaned up against a tree behind us. And his friend gets up, gets loaded, gets all his stuff. We're tucked back in some trees. We're ready to go, ready to, start hearing some wood ducks start flying early on. And this kid is sitting back on a chair with his arms crossed after he got off this phone call. And he's just sitting there, and then he starts kicking the water, and he's making some racket, some noise. And I look over at my son Jackson. I say, man, he's trying to do this on purpose, I think. He's pissed off. He wants to make a show. And his buddy turns around to him and he says, hey, he says, man, you going to come hunt? And he says, yeah, I'm going to come hunt, kind of, whatever type situation, just a shitty attitude, And he finally, eventually, he gets up after a couple of minutes of shooting light. He finally gets up, comes up, stands next to his buddy, and, tries to start hunting a little bit with us. But throughout that, he's still making little comments about this and that. And then, he sees that I've shut him off, basically. I'm not talking to him no more. I'm having a conversation with my son. I'm having, the friend of his is trying to bring up conversation. I'm talking with him. And he notices that. So he's like, okay. He says, he comes up to me, he goes out in the decoys, and then he walks up to me and he kind of says, man, he says, I apologize, I'm sorry. And he keeps, I said, no problem. I said, I understand the situation. I said, but, I was hoping we could really kind of iron this out. Me inviting y'all to hunt with us, I thought we could work things out, make it a little bit better, have a better situation than we found ourselves in so far today. So to cut the story a little shorter now, basically what it was, just an uncomfortable hunt. We killed a couple of wood ducks that we shot. And then I told him, I said, I looked at Jackson. Jackson looked at me and said, Dad, you ready to go? I said, yeah, which we cut our hunt short. We typically don't do that. So he was ready to go. I could tell, and he wasn't having a good time. And I said, okay. I said, you know what? I said, we're going to go ahead. We're going to pick up guys, this and that. And then they decided they were going to pick up as well at that point. We go ahead. We all help each other kind of pick up the spread, do all that. And then we shook hands. I went up to him. I said, look, nice meeting y'all. I said, hopefully we don't have to run into this situation again. I said, but it was a pleasure meeting y'all. I said, y'all have a good day. And we went about our ways. Okay. So hunt's over. Just an uncomfortable hunt. Really just a messed up situation. But I'm thinking to myself, and I had a conversation a few weeks earlier, or the week prior, I should say, when I ran into the brother of this young man, when he was sitting in the hole. I had a conversation with one of my good friends who's also a big hunter here in Louisiana. He hunts a lot of public land. He's a social media content creator. A lot of you guys know him. I'm not going to mention the name right now, but anyway, somebody that I trust, let me say that, and that has probably dealt with a situation like I found myself in. So I told him the situation about opening weekend, how we went. We made it to the hole. Somebody was in the hole, came in off of private land, and then he told me, hey, it's really no use y'all come on the weekend because we're going to be in these holes and we're going to be hunting these holes, da-da-da. And he's had the opinion. He was like, oh, no, man, that's bull crap. You can't do that, He's like, he can't be claiming their land plus public land and telling you not to hunt it. And I said, what do you think I should do? And he says, man, you need to have a conversation with him, which is really good advice. It's a conversation will iron things out many, many times if you're able to get to that point where you have a conversation. So anyway, we went ahead, we did that. I told him, I said, I'm going to hang up. I said, with you. I said, but man, I appreciate the advice. I said, that's exactly what I'm going to try to do. Because the other option, I was like, well, do I call wildlife and fisheries? And I really need to get some clarification on this whole accessing from private land into the WMA and vice versa, especially launching a boat. That's something that was on my mind, and I was like, do I call wildlife and fisheries? Do I bring this up? Do I get them involved in this? And then, I really hate to do that because it starts bringing negative attention to that area. And then next thing you have, the place crawling with game wardens, and it becomes a hassle for everybody. I really didn't want to do that, and get them involved and also waste their time, So I said, okay, my plans were I was going to have a conversation with the guy, which then the following weekend, here I am with the younger brother trying to have a conversation with him, really not receptive to having a civil conversation. Maybe it's just immaturity because of his age, probably what it boils down to. I would think, if it had been an older gentleman, we maybe could have had a more civil conversation, a more pleasant hunt, maybe talk things over, worked it out. But unfortunately, I was dealing with somebody, who was a little bit more immature in that situation, So anyway, so I get back home that afternoon, guys, and I'm at my house. And I get a phone call. This is kind of where it gets interesting. I get a phone call from a area code that is not where I live at. And I had been dealing with this specific area code earlier in the day. I was looking at purchasing a truck. And they were calling from this area code. So I thought, okay, hey, it's probably one of my salesmen or finance guys, somebody calling me. Let me answer this phone. Because typically, if it's not in my caller ID, I'm not answering the phone. I'll let them leave a voicemail, So I go ahead, I answer the phone. I say, hello. The gentleman says, hello, is this Jacob? I said, yes, it is. I said, who am I speaking with? And he says, I'm such and such. And I said, oh, okay. And I said, how you doing today? He says, well, I'm not doing very good. He says, I heard you threatened my son today and you came in and took their duck hole. on this particular management area. And I said, wait a second. I said, first of all, how did you get my number? I said, and second of all, I said, you have no clue what you're talking about in this situation. And this was the father of the son that I had hunted with that morning, and also the older son from the weekend before. And this dude's pretty hot when he calls me, and he's going off and he's saying, you shouldn't be threatening my son. You can't come in just because he's a younger kid and take their duck hole and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, hold on. I get pretty heated with the guy because at this point he's called me, and he's attacking me in this situation, and I'm looking at it like I haven't done a damn thing wrong to begin with. So I told him, I said, your son says we came in on his duck hole. I said, did he tell you that we made it to this particular hole first and that he hadn't made it to that hole yet? And he says, well, what are you talking about? So I tell him the situation about how his motor wasn't running. He had told me, and he was having to drag the boat through the woods. All that had, unfolded that morning in reality, quote unquote, let me say in the truth. I told him that situation. I said, so listen, I said, don't you ever call my phone again and start telling me that I attacked your son and that I threatened your son and made him get out the duck hole and this and that. And we have some pretty choice words. I'm going to be honest with y'all guys. I didn't take that phone call real well. And he had choice words for me, and I had some for him as well. So we kind of both got that off our chest. But I told him, I said, if you want to know the truth, I said, what you should probably do is look your son's friend in the eye, ask him what happened, and let him tell you. I said, if he tells you the truth, then I said, you'll know the actual truth of what happened this morning. I said, but I did not kick your son out of the hole. I said, I made it to the hole with my 16-year-old son first. I said, we claimed that hole. I said, and then we were gracious enough to invite them to hunt with us because I seen your son wasn't taking it so well. And when I told him that, he kind of backed off of it. And he says, that's not what he told me. And I said, well, sir, that's what happened. I said, I could assure you that's what happened. And I said, to be honest with you, I said, we made it to that hole, which technically we have rights to hunt that hole per the rules of the wildlife management system, And this is what this man tells me at this point. When I tell him that statement right there, he says, well, technically, he says, I could tell him to set up 10 yards from you and hunt right next to you. And when he told me that, I knew right then and there, guys, what type of person I'm dealing with at this point. Once again, the word entitled came to my mind. And I'm thinking to myself, you have to be an entitled person to be able to tell somebody that, another grown-up that first off, and a fellow hunter. And he says, I could tell him to hunt 10 yards from you, he said, and he's legal to do that because that is public land. And I said, well, that tells me what an absolute person you are. I said, that you would tell your son. I said, that's how you would handle it? And he says, what do you mean? I said, that's how you would handle a situation like that? You would tell your son because you're pissed off you didn't get the hole that you go set up 10 yards or 15 or 20 yards or whatever next to another hunter to fuck his hunt up and make him miserable because you didn't get what you wanted? And he says, well, he could. Technically, he could. Legally, he could do it. Well, yes, he could do it legally. But I said, that tells me what type of human is raising him and his other brothers. I said, and how they're taught to handle things on public land. I said, you're an absolute piece of shit, to be honest with you, if that's how you're teaching your sons to handle things. And I told him the truth. I told him what I felt in that situation. So his solution was, hey, if they don't get it, since you're saying you claim that public land spot because you got to it first and you have rights to hunt it, I could tell him to set up right next to you and he could go hunt right next to you because it's public land. So that's the type of people that we're dealing with, guys. When we talk about, some of the issues we're running into in waterfowl hunting nowadays on public land, we talk a lot of times the younger generations catch a bad rap for the way they handle it. But here we are. This man is 10 years older than myself from what he told me. He's about, in his mid-50s, later 50s. And here he is. That's his solution to the situation. So it's not only the younger generation. Let me tell you right now, because I'm experiencing it, And I have older friends that are also, not very good at taking these younger guys in and helping them out or making things work. We talked about that. So here we are, got this man telling me that's how he would handle that situation or could handle that situation. And that told me everything right there I needed to know, about this family and about this man. So he says, I've already called the game boards, he said, and I have access. I can launch from my public land, no problem. They told me that's 100% legal. I said, well, I disagree from my understanding of the rules. I said, but I'm also going to call them now since you want to push this further. I said, but don't you ever call my phone again to speak to me again. I said, if you want to speak to me, I will meet you at the public boat launch. I said, and we can have a conversation in that parking lot. I told the man that. And he says, well, I'm going to be there tomorrow hunting that spot with my boys, and I'm going to be there every weekend after hunting there. He said, and we will beat you there every time, he told me. And I said, okay. I said, so there again, you are claiming public land, that you're trying to tell other hunters not to hunt because you're going to be hunting it. I said, so I will make sure that I let wildlife fisheries know that as well. So we hang up the phone, guys, at that point. We said what we had to say, and we hang it up. And I said, okay, that's it. I got to call wildlife fisheries. I need some clarification on this situation. I said, I need to speak to somebody. Let's see what happens. Who's right, who's wrong. For future hunts, I need to know, because if this is totally illegal, then I need to probably not hunt that hole anymore. It's just one of the holes I hunt, So if I got to give it up, I'm going to give it up, and we'll go about our way, So I said, but I do want to know for other hunters that hunt with us back there, friends of mine that hunt that area. We need clarification on it. So I hang up the phone. I call Wildlife and Fisheries at that point. I call Wildlife and Fisheries. I get to speak to a lieutenant over at the Lafayette office. And I tell him, I say, hey, my name is, Jacob Robery. I said, I hunt Sherburne, the wildlife management area. I said, this is happening over there. I said, and I need some insight on some clarifications of some stuff. And he says, okay. He says, I said, are you familiar with it? He says, yeah, oh, yeah. He says, I'm absolutely familiar with it. So I said, okay, great. I said, so this is the situation I said that I find myself in. I tell him all the backstory. He says, well, wait, hold on a second. He says, I actually spoke to a gentleman about you, Mr. Robery. He says, about an hour and a half ago, he says, a man called me. And I said, okay. I said, yeah. I said, if you don't mind me asking, what did he tell you? And he proceeds to tell me, he says, well, the man told me that they're accessing, through the public launch to go through the WMA and hunt their land, their property. And I said, wait a second. I said, can you repeat that? He says, yeah. He says, the man told me that they're accessing the public launch, going through the WMA, and they're hunting their private property. He says, and that's totally illegal. He says, that's no problem. And I said, well, wait a second. I said, it's the complete opposite of that. And he says, well, what do you mean? I said, they have a boat stashed on public land that they launched on public land at the beginning of the season at the WMA launch, went through the WMA onto the private land, had the boat stationed in the water ready to go. I said, and then when we're accessing the WMA legally, I said, and all the guys are coming back and they hear us crank the motors up, they simply slip into their boat on private land, come over to the public side and claim the hole. And he says, he says, wait a second. He says, that's completely a different story in this situation. He says, that is not going to fly. He says, but that is not what this gentleman told me. He says, this gentleman told me that he's coming from public over to hunt his private property. I said, no, sir, he is not. And I told him again the situation, how it worked, and what the kids had told me, the sons had told me. He says, okay, that is a totally different situation. He said, that is not supposed to happen. He should be checking in, checking out, going in with the boat, pulling the boat out at the end of the hunt, that type of deal. He said, that's the way it should work, and I'll check the rules to verify that. I said, okay. I said, look, I'm not trying to get this man in any kind of trouble. I said, he called me. He basically, went off on me about trying to take the holes from his son. I said, I actually made it there with my son. I told him that whole situation, backstory. I said, But I said, I really don't care about the man. I said, I'm not worried about getting this man in any kind of trouble. I'm not trying to, call you to, bitch about him. I said, what I'm calling you about is I need clarification of what the rule states. I said, and is this legal what they're doing, or do they need to be staging up with the rest of us public land hunters if they're going to hunt on public side to hunt these holes? And he says, yes, that should be the situation. He says, but he says, I tell you what I'm going to do. He says, I'm going to send an agent out there in the morning. He said, because I had also mentioned to him that the weekend before, I was pretty certain that older son had set up in the hole before 4 o'clock, had entered the WMA before 4 o'clock. At this point, I just assumed tell him the truth because I want everything to be on the table. So I told him that. So he says, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to send an agent, try to get an agent out there in the morning. He says, and I'm going to have a guy sitting in the hole, or sitting in that area. He says, and kind of monitor things just to see how it all unfolds. Are you hunting? I said, no, I'm not hunting, but the father told me he would be there hunting, and he'll be there every weekend from the rest of the season. He says, okay. He says, well, I'm going to call this gentleman back. He says, and I'm going to talk to him. He says, and we're going to go from there, he says, and then I'm going to follow up with you to let you know what he tells me, and we'll try to get some clarification from both of y'all. I said, okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it. So about an hour goes by, and I get a phone call, guys. And it says, hey, this is Lieutenant such and such. I said, man, I appreciate you calling me back. I said, I know this ain't what you want to deal with heading into the holidays, but unfortunately, I said, we need some clarification on this because it's not only me, it's other hunters that are involved when they want to hunt this area, And he says, yeah, no problem. He says, I don't blame you. I'm glad y'all called about it. He says, but I do have a little bit of bad news. And I said, okay. I said, what is that? And he says, this particular family, he said, has this private property that butts up to the wildlife management area. He said years ago, it appears as though they sold some of this property to the management area. He said, which is some of this area that y'all are, hunting. He said, and when they did that, he said the gentleman acquired a permit for the family at that point that would allow them to launch off of their property as long as they stage up. He said, like y'all have to stage and then come on to the WMA. They could come onto the WMA with this permit, allowing them to be able to enter the WMA. And I said, okay. I said, well, that's interesting. He says, if it wouldn't be for this permit that they acquired years ago when this property was sold, he said, they wouldn't be able to do that like they're doing it. He says, but they are. He says, did they ever mention anything to you about a permit? I said, no, sir. They never mentioned nothing about that to anybody. I said, they just told us they're coming in and that, what's going on. So he says, yeah, he says, it's a messed up situation. He says, but he says, there's really not a ton I could say to that in that situation. And I said, okay. I said, well, if that's what it is, that's what it is. I said, but let me ask you a question. I said, the staging area, I said, the way this is set up, I said, they have a staging area entry from the main highway that comes into the reserve. I said, and then there's a long four-wheeler ATV trail that goes all the way back to where the WMA ends. They have a gate, starts private property. I said, if they have to stage like the rest of us, wouldn't they need to come up from the back, come up to the front staging area, stage, then make their way back, I said, to be able to access into the WMA? And he says, technically, yes, they would. He says, but he says, in a situation like that, he says it would be really hard for us to monitor it from a wildlife and fisheries standpoint. He said, we would have to have an agent there monitoring that daily. He said, we really don't have resources to do that. So I was like, okay. I said, because that would make the playing field a little bit more level for the public land guys that are hunting public land. If they had to come up to the front, leave their camp, their private lease, come up to the front, stage with everybody else, then they can make their way back like everybody else is supposed to do. I said, that to me would make sense and would be something that would make it fair game for everybody at that point. And he said, you are 100% right on that. He says, and you're probably 100% right from the way the rules stated. He says, but it's just too hard to monitor that. He said, so what they're doing is they're as long as they're staging on their private property and then they step into the WMA, hop in their boat, and then come on over. He says that it's a loophole that they're using, but he said, it's really too hard to monitor for us to maintain that and, correct it. I said, well, what about the boat being in the water? I said, there's no, with them launching at the beginning of the season, coming through, not pulling the boat back out, re-entering the. I said that he says once again, that's another deal. He said that would be something we can maybe look at a little bit further. He said, and tell them, hey, you're gonna have to either pull the boat out after hunts and come back over and then re-enter the WMA. He says that may be able to correct it. He says, but once again, he said it's a little loophole there, and that's what they're doing. So at the end of the day, guys, what happened and whatever the situation or the side of the fence that you fall on this story, this is happening all over the place. It's not just this one area. It's not just my situation, my story. But this year, I have seen that happen in multiple stories on social media that's been reported. A few weeks ago, they had video of a confrontation over a public land spot that the guy was picking up the other people's decoys, throwing them around, doing this. And another big issue is, that I run into a lot that's becoming a big issue is blinds being built on wildlife management areas, brush blinds, because what's happening is a lot of people nowadays are building brush blinds, but they're trying to stake claim to these brush blinds, almost like it's their blind, almost treating it like it's a permanent blind in many cases. And it's something that, I used to look at it a little bit differently, because I used to see a brush blind set up on management area. And I'd say, well, I'm not going to hunt the brush blind, this and that. I had conflicting thoughts on that. I always have. I have some of my friends will say, man, I won't touch another brush blind. I will hunt a brush blind that's already set up. And then I have other guys that will say, and kind of the way I feel, to be honest with you, like my dad and them used to do, is that, hey, if it's a brush blind and it's on a wildlife management area, then it's fair game for first come, first serve. If you built the blind, all of you that build permanent blinds, we've done, or not permanent blinds, bamboo blinds, I've done them myself. Me and my sons have done them ourselves. If I build a blind on a WMA, a brush blind, then I know I'm building it for everybody. That's just the way I look at it. I'm not going to be able to get that blind every time I want to hunt it. But at least we'll have blinds that we can bounce around and use. And that's always worked really, really well throughout the years, and even coming up with my dad when we would hunt public land. We never had issues that way. And that's always kind of the side of the fence I fell on, that, hey, it's public for everybody. If you want to build a brush blind, no matter how small, how big it is, damn well going in that blind can be used by anybody. Just because you put that blood, sweat, and tears into building that blind legally doesn't give you rights to be able to call that your blind and hunt that blind every time you go out throughout the season. And some people may disagree. A lot of people may disagree with that statement, but that's the rules. That's the way it's stated to us when we hunt public land. And that's pretty much the way it is everywhere I've ever hunted on public land. We know that going in. But what I'm seeing nowadays is that some of these people that are building these brush blinds are treating it like it's a private blind, like it's their permanent blind. And that, hey, I'm going to hunt that hole. And when I pull up in that hole, if somebody's in it, fuck them. I'm kicking them out. You're going to get the hell out of my blind because I built it, blah, 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 this and that. And man, that's just, in my opinion, that's not the way to go about it, man. We can't be successful as a group of hunters if that's the way we look at it. I got a younger generation hunter that I've been hunting with a good bit this season. And let me take a sip of this. And I can tell you that he is scared to death to hunt a brush blind that's set up already. And I know he is. He don't even have to say it. I could just tell. He's like, man, if I hunt this, I'm gonna have people come kick me out. And I'm gonna, this and that. And I don't say a whole lot about it to him. I just let him kind of handle it his way. But the way I look at it is, hey, first of all, if you want to hunt that blind, get to that blind set up over there. The way I like to do it, if I'm in that situation, is I had a situation first split. I got to the blind. I had an A spot, a B spot, a C spot. I had backups, if I did, want to decide that I got into a situation where it was confrontational or something, I could move if I needed to. But what I did in that situation is I pulled up to the blind. We got there first. I told Jackson, I said, we're not setting up any decoys. We're not even throwing out a decoy. We're just going to sit in the hole. I said, and then if somebody comes in on us, we'll talk to them. We'll have a conversation. We'll either hunt together or we'll have a conversation and we can make things work. That's how we're going to handle this, And sure enough, in that situation, I had a guy. I saw the boat coming dead at me, ran to me, ran straight. I told Jackson, I said, he's coming to us. Sure enough, boat pulls up. Who are you? Hollering, in the dark. And I told him who I was. It was a younger gentleman, pulled up. We had a civil conversation. This younger man was very respectful, never got ugly, never said a cuss word, never said, he just told me, he said, this is a blind that we built. Come to find out, once we talked, he hadn't built the blind. It was a brother and his friend that had built it, but he wanted to hunt it. And we ended up working things out. That's the point that I want to make. We worked things out. We got it situated. I actually gave up the blind to him that morning, went over to another blind. And I told him when I left, I said, hey, look, I'm going to give it to you today. He was shocked. I gave him the blind. And he said, and he had told me, I know this is public. So he knew the rules, and he wasn't pushing it. But since he was so polite, he was so kind, I told him, I said, I'll make you a deal. I said, man, I'm going to let you have this blind. I said, because yes, I did get to it first. I said, and we're too big with our boats to hunt, in this blind. I said, but I'm going to go hunt over there. I said, you do me a favor. I said, next time if we run into each other again in this hole or another hole, I said, maybe you give up the hole to me if I made it there first. I said, you'd be okay with that. He says, yes, sir, absolutely. He says, thank you so much for giving it to us. He said, being civil about it. He said, it's so refreshing to talk to somebody that's civil. Because our attitudes now, we just expect the worst from other hunters when we meet up on public land like this. And I think if we could have a conversation, a civil conversation, we wouldn't have to worry about all that, man. We could make our experiences so much better. And that's just something that I find is becoming really, really hard because it is a growing struggle for public land spots. Even though we're losing, acreage, that we talked about before in public land, adequate spots to waterfowl hunt, then we have to run, be on top of each other. It's becoming a real struggle, guys. And situations like I found myself in where not only is it just public land we're having to have struggles on, well, now we're having to, have a situation I find myself in where it's a public land or a private land owner trying to also claim public land as well. So now you're having to deal with both sides of the fence, public and private, in an area that should be, no problem. The rules are simple. Everybody access it the way it's supposed to be, and let's move on. Have a good hunt and make it fun for everybody, and then move on, and then we move on to another day. So I don't know. I don't know what the situation, what the answer is. I think civil conversation is definitely one of the biggest solutions to it. But look, this whole deal of claiming spots, man, we got to get away from that. We got to get away from claiming spots. I know everybody wants to kill ducks. I know everybody wants to have successful days in the blind and have a good time and have a good experience. And yes, some of us put in more work than others when it comes to building brush blinds, doing that type of stuff. But we have to understand that if we are taking the time to do that stuff and to make ourselves more successful, and we're putting and staking claim and digging those, that bamboo into that mud on public land, that there is a chance that other people are going to benefit from it as well. And that's just the way it is. That's the way the law states it. And is it right? Maybe not. Is it wrong? Maybe not. Maybe there's just days where it's going to be your days where the cards are going to fall your way. And there's days where you're not going to, get the blind, and you're going to have to look for other spots. Just because you killed the day before or previously, just like me in that situation where we had a successful opening day and we wanted that hole the next day, and I got there and somebody was in there. Yeah, my situation was a little different because they were coming in from a public or private land area, but I could have got in there and raised hell and bitched and moaned and got in a fight with the guy. But I told him simply, hey, I'm going to move over here and hunt. It's going to be a little close to you, But that's the situation we're all in right now because, you kind of cut everybody off, at the end of the line before it hits your property, So no matter what the situation is, my point is we got to kind of work together, man. But this staking claim to blinds, to brush blinds, to all this type of stuff, man, we got to get away from that. That's not the way the system's set up to be. And it's becoming like that. Like the way I see it is public land guys that are trying to kick these people out of these brush blinds. It's almost like you're trying to have a lease or a private blind that only you could hunt. And if anybody else tries to come in on you, you're going to kick them out. Well, guess what? As public land guys, we don't have that right. If you owned your own property, you could do that. But there's a reason we're hunting public land because we don't have property that we own to hunt, So we really got to break away from that, man. And a lot of you listening are going to say, well, man, I don't even want to fuck with that because I'm not going to want to get into a confrontation with people. I don't even want to deal with that type of stuff, And hey, look, if you're in that situation, I don't blame you at all. And I really try to stray away from that as well as much as I can. But there are situations and, with weather conditions, where the birds want to be, all that type of stuff plays into, hey, I'm going to try to be as close to where I see the birds going as I can. If I have to put up with a little bit of pressure, I'm going to put up with a little bit of pressure if I have to. But I'd really like to be away from the pressure, as much as possible and still be able to have a successful hunt. And there's guys that are going to be like me and try to be those guys. But then there's other guys that don't have as much knowledge of other areas, other places to hunt, maybe even in a particular WMA, and they're going to go where tradition takes them and where they've heard the birds typically go and the hunters typically go. That's going to be the situation for a lot of people out there. So if you find yourself in that situation, just know that just because there is a brush blind there, you have as much right if you make it to that place as anybody else that may have even set up that blind or whatever it may be. And I know that's kind of taboo to some people to say that or hear that, and you may disagree with that, but that is the way it is, guys. Because look, I'm gonna be honest with you, like this one that I hunted earlier in the season. There was 100 brush blinds in the area that I was in, and that's probably being light on it. There was 100 brush blinds probably in this area. So you can't have 100 brush blinds that belong only to the people that bought them or made them, and say that nobody else can hunt in your own public land. You just can't do that, It's not a situation where it's like one here and then one here and they're perfectly spaced out. And then you have all this area around you to go find other options, When you got 100 brush blinds in a particular area, that's if you're staking claim to that, then that's almost like just saying, hey, there's your own lease with everybody has their own blind right here, And I disagree with that. And some of you may disagree with me on that, but I disagree with that. It's public. If you want to get there, hunt it. You get there first. You have access to do so. There's laws against that if people tell you to get out, there's hunter harassment laws just for you people that aren't real familiar with all this stuff. Maybe you're new to hunting. There are hunter harassment laws that are out there that Wildlife and Fisheries will enforce very strictly. So just know that. Now, I'm not telling you go hunt everybody's private, or no, I don't want to say private blind, their brush blind that they built. That's not, what I'm telling everybody to go do, find a brush blind, hop in and claim it because you got there first. I don't agree with that. I think there's a judgment call in those situations. I think if you do want to hunt it, a situation like I did where you get to the hole, don't throw out your decoys, kind of sit there, wait to see if somebody comes, and then have a conversation about it. Maybe you work it out, you hunt together, maybe you don't, somebody separates, goes off to a different area. I think that's probably the best way to handle it if you're going to hunt blinds that are already, brushed up and built on public property. That would be my answer to that solution and advice to give you all. So I don't know, guys. I think this is a topic that needs to be discussed. I think my story, hopefully my story that I discussed on this episode kind of sheds a little bit of light. Let me know what you guys think. I'd love to know down in the comments. Was I right in the way I handled it? Do you think I handled it properly? Do you not think I handled it properly? Was the landowners right, the private landowners right in this situation? Maybe should they have said, hey, we have a permit for our family that allows us to do this, even though they weren't doing it completely legal still. It still wasn't completely legal. But at least they could have said, hey, we have a permit that allows us to come in off our property and, whatever. Maybe I would have said, okay, no problem. But I'm for the public land guy on public land. That's just the way I feel. I think if a guy's going to get there and sleep in a truck all night long and he has to follow the rules and can't leave the launch till 4 and has to be outside of the reserve on a public highway staging up, I think everybody should have to follow those rules, if you're going to be on public land. Now, if you're hunting, that landowner's hunting his private land, sleep till 4 o'clock and then come in at 4:30 or whatever, and hunt your private land. That's the way I see it. To me, it's pretty simple, but unfortunately, politics play a role in it, like everything else, and I guess you could say the public land guy kind of has to pay the price in a situation like that, but I don't know. I'd like to know your guys' thoughts on it, man. So let me know what you think if you're watching us right here on YouTube or Facebook this episode. Drop a comment down below. I'd love to hear your feedback on this episode. I'd love to hear maybe some situations that you guys have experienced yourself out there. Let me know your thoughts on the whole public land, brush blind situation. I'd love to know your thoughts on that as well. And we can maybe have a conversation about it if you guys have any other questions. I'd be happy to answer them on our behalf with our situation that we had. So really, guys, that's something I wanted to talk about. I thought they would make a very interesting story to tell and share with everybody. And I really appreciate you guys tuning into this episode. I know we went a little bit longer on this one, but there's a lot of details that were in this story that I wanted to share with you guys. And once again, guys, this is a great time. I want to thank all of our sponsors here on the show at Last Stop Waterfowl Outdoors, Cajun Country Waterfowl, True Dave Outdoor Products, Game Changer Boats, Benoit's Performance Baits, Blind Grass Blind Materials, and Wingman Waterfowl, guys. Great companies, all making great products. Outdoorsmen that support other outdoorsmen. Go check them out. They have all kind of items for outdoorsmen in all their different genres that are great products. They offer great services, and they are great people first and foremost to work with, guys. And we could not do what we do here at Last Stop Waterfowl Outdoors without all of our great sponsors that support us and our cause. So go support those guys. Go check them out on social media, on their websites. Purchase products from them, guys, because they make great products for outdoorsmen just like you and me. And they're great companies and people to work with. So if you enjoyed this episode, guys, we'd appreciate it if you give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to the channel and you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook, we ask that you do so for great outdoor content and more outdoor content just like you received here in this episode. We'd appreciate a subscription to the channels. It means a lot to us. And until next time, guys, that's all I have for this episode. This is Jacob with Last Stop Waterfowl Outdoors podcast. Signing off. Y'all have a good day, and we'll talk again soon.